All right, so in the last video, we were talking about this kind of additional layer of alienation, this additional, more, I guess you could call it subjective, although I think it's objective as well, like layer of alienation that arises specifically in the contemporary, modern, highly technologized context of global capitalism, where, you know, the anecdote is these workers working at a bread factory and they have no knowledge of how to make bread. They don't learn anything that could extend or be useful outside of that highly particular context, and that context is entirely dependent on capitalism. So yeah, they're just standing at a computer screen pressing buttons. Buttons represent different types of bread, and, you know, there are various graphs and whatnot that show like the temperature of the bread and its doneness, how close it is to being complete or whatever. But I think, you know, I think that it's interesting to, for me, when I think about this, I'm immediately thinking about computers and the way that we use computers, and the alienation that arises from the like corporate software products that we all use. I mean, I don't use them, but you probably do. I use some of them. I use like internet platforms like YouTube, for example, which are part of the problem. They're part of what I'm talking about here. It's not just software that we run on our computers and our phones and whatnot. I don't have a smartphone. But you know, web apps are a form of alienation as well. So the idea here is that, you know, like these programs that we use, just to try to pick an example, like Photoshop or Word, like Microsoft Word, these are all graphical programs that, you know, in order to get anything done with them, you have to like go into some kind of menu and click around, and it's all, you know, graphically represented. Even your desktop itself, you know, the visual metaphor of a desktop is a desk. So you have like different windows which are meant to represent like papers on your desk, and you can move, that's your finger, and you can point and like select things, whatever. But I think it's interesting to think about how we are actually alienated from our computers and from each other. The things that we do with our computers largely, you know, access and communicate with other people. That's what the internet is all about. Computers are really very much used to access the internet. That seems to be like their primary function nowadays in the consumer sphere anyway, which is what I'm talking about. But yeah, so these like graphical environments are a form of alienation, because you like have no real direct access, not just to the source code, but you have no direct access to like the program itself. You cannot, generally speaking, reconfigure the program, even if you're talking specifically about a graphical environment. You know, in OBS, for example, that's like a live streaming piece of software that I've been starting to use, but you can like move like different boxes around, and a lot of different software you can, you know, like superficially reconfigure it to change how it appears. You can change color schemes and maybe a font or two, but like that's about as deep into it as you can get. But you can't really like access anything deeper than that. You can't really, you know, change how you like interact with the data. You cannot make any kind of fundamental changes to the program. You're really confined into like lanes that the developers have set for you. Even the customization options in most software are very heavily confined and controlled and limited, and, you know, the customizations that you can make are very superficial. So that is like an additional layer of alienation that really interests me, because like we all use computers so much, we depend so heavily on them, especially, you know, in these times. And I feel like the vast majority of the population is not thinking about the kinds of like interactions they have with their computing software, not just the other people on the end of it, the people that we are accessing via our computer software, but the software itself. And I think that is not a good blind spot to have, because really, like, the software it's a humongous part of the economy. It is like the dominant part of the global economy is the internet giants like Google and Facebook and whatnot. But in addition to that, like those companies, like, we all know about how evil they are. We all know that they are hell-bent on destroying our minds, and they are bending unfathomable resources and power that has never existed before in history to destroy our minds, to pacify us and control us using this software that we have no access to. We have no idea what they're doing, what data they're collecting, what they're doing with it, who they're giving it to, and we also have no options for actually making the software ours. Now, a lot of the software that I use Linux. I've been using pretty much strictly free software, free as in Libre software, for the past like 5+ years. I've been using it off and on since I was like 14, but strictly for the past 5 years. And some of the software that I use nowadays, in order to configure it, in order to to put it superficially, in order to like change the font or the color scheme, you have to actually go into the source code and modify the actual like fundamental what is fundamental about the software, the source code, and in so doing you're making it yours. Like, there's no two instances of this piece of software that are alike, if provided that the user has actually done anything to change it, because the base, like, the whole point of it is that the base configuration is supposed to be very minimal and small, and then you have to go into the source code and change it yourself. And I think that is, that's great, and I love it, and I think that everybody should have that kind of relationship with their software. That's the kind of relationship that we should have with everything in the world. It's like peeling back a layer of alienation, like an additional layer of alienation that is added on by the technocrats. But at the same time, like, I don't really blame everyone for not wanting to become like a computer nerd and like a Linux nerd. I can't really kind of like impose that on everyone. So what is the solution here? Like, you have these massive companies that are destroying our minds, and like, we are entirely dependent on these software services that they provide for us, and which we have no real meaningful access to, no like control over. We are entirely subject to these corporations' whims and to their control apparatuses. And on the other end, in order to escape that, you really have to kind of get pretty deep into it. Like, there are Linux distributions like Ubuntu that are pretty user friendly, and you don't really need to be a nerd to take a political stance in terms of the software that you use, and actually start moving away from, and then the question of how meaningful that is politically is another thing, so I won't even go there. But I won't really like cast judgment on people who are not interested enough in this sort of thing to not be motivated to go out and reconfigure their computer operating system or whatever. But the only real solution here is to abolish capitalism. I think that under communism, you can have the same kind of dynamic where there are people who don't really want to get super involved in their computers. They don't want to like go under the hood and have to reconfigure source code just in order to change a color scheme or whatever. But obviously, you don't want like shady corporations controlling your mind very subtly in ways that you don't even understand, and like collecting data on you and just like absolutely controlling your life and really reconfiguring society to the whims of, you know, one fucking individual. So the way is to democratize that and, you know, have every piece of software be open source and free so that the people who do want to do that kind of development can do so. And then also at the same time, there'll be such a proliferation of varieties of, you know, pieces of software that there'll be one thing for everybody. And we won't all need to become computer hackers in order to become more in touch with the machines that are, you know, now controlling our lives. Anyway, just a few thoughts, but yeah, try learning how to code.